Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing abrupt climate change. And that's a serious sunset going on behind me in the window. Enjoy that while you can. Sorry for my absence, just too many things on the plate, mostly children and activities and work and school, stuff like that. Thank you all for all your comments and input on the last video. I know quite a few of you had a lot to say. I'm getting close to 500 comments on that on that video, which is a lot of comments for one video. So, but thank you for the back and forth and the debate and discussion. It is important and hopefully productive. I like to talk about other things on this channel. Abrupt climate change is extremely interesting to me, and I like to use it as a vehicle to talk about other things. As you may already know, you can use climate change to talk about philosophy or psychology or religion, or man's inhumanity to man and the capitalism and all kinds of things, history. There are a number of things attached to climate change, even if it seems not related. I think it's all very important. And I also think that one of the major problems that is facing us today, not just the examination of evidence and not just the intake of information or how we take in information, but how we're allowed to talk about information. This is really important, and probably the most important thing about the aftermath of 9/11 is that it's created this thing where it's not just taboo, but almost I don't know what the right word would be. Like antisocial, I don't know how to describe it, but to talk about certain things, it's becoming the divide between the establishment and the non-establishment, or left, right, or whatever it is. It's becoming so pronounced. And I just find that very interesting. Like, what are we allowed to talk about? And climate change is a very good vehicle for that, because, in the mainstream media, they don't talk about climate change. They certainly don't talk about abrupt climate change. People who are in touch with abrupt climate change are definitely the weirdos in the pack. Probably more, maybe not more weird than deniers, but in the realm of, deniers are weirdos, but they're way more mainstream. I mean, mainstream news and mainstream society will allow deniers to, go on or debate people or have a voice or whatever. But when you start talking about abrupt climate change, you and I both know that people just shut all the way down, and they're like, oh my God, I can't, let's not talk about that. Let's change the subject. Let's, let's plan a trip to the beach. Let's do something else. So it's just, it's an interesting subject for me, what people are allowed to talk about or contemplate. And in my mind, there are some things that you probably don't need to waste your time on, but, nothing is off the table. I think everything should be questioned. And, what do abrupt climate change people question? The mainstream view on climate change. On the other side of the deniers, right? There's a mainstream view of climate change, and there's abrupt climate change. This is the denier side. We're out of the norm. So congratulations. Let's talk about What's going on? CNN wants to know if I want my news summarized for me in 5 minutes each morning. I said, no, thank you. Wilmington, North Carolina. A few places in North Carolina got rain on Tuesday, but that didn't stop some bloated rivers from rising. 14 river gauges recorded levels above major flood stage, the North Carolina Emergency Management Agency tweeted. Many of those waterways were rising or cresting, though a few were receding. The Cape Fear River near Fayetteville was rising and has quadrupled in depth, and it's only going to get worse, likely bringing more misery. Is that the river that's close to the nuclear plant, or is that another river? Or is that the Neuse River? But there are glimmers of hope in the wake of Florence. Some North Carolina residents were being told they can return home to the beachside community of Wrightsville. 4 days ago, the Cape Fear River near Fayetteville was 15 feet deep. By Tuesday afternoon, it had topped 60 feet, and it still hasn't crested. Ooh, Lord. That is high. Overflow from the river downstream has created a new waterway on what used to be Interstate 40 in Pender County. This isn't a river, this is Interstate 40, the state's transportation department tweeted, along with drone footage of the scene. This illustrates our message that travel in this area is impassable and unsafe. The good news was that the Lumber River, which has spilled into the town of Lumberton, was slowly receding, though it was expected to still be at major flood stage on Sunday. When it comes to flooding, no one cares that Florence has left the Carolinas. Rivers gushing downstream toward already flooded cities means more homes at risk. The next 48 hours are extremely critical, said Brock Long, head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA. Fayetteville City Manager Doug Hewitt said 12,000 residents are in harm's way as the Cape Fear River keeps growing. He said the river is expected to crest at 61 to 62 feet around noon Wednesday. Okay. I'm going to link this below. You guys get the idea. I'm going to, it's bad flooding in North Carolina. I'm going to read something from Truth Out from Darja Mail today. Florence, a preview of our climate future. This is rather short, but I'm going to read something else from Darja Mail as well. Days after making landfall, Hurricane Florence continues to dump rain across the eastern seaboard. Politicians and media have called the amount of rainfall across North Carolina epic. That state has borne the brunt of the impacts. When Florence made landfall last Friday, Wilmington, North Carolina was hit by gusts of 105 miles per hour, the strongest winds the city had felt since 1958. One mayor described Florence as twice the size of Hurricane Hugo, which raked the Carolinas back in 1989, while residents described the aftermath of the flooding and destruction as similar to that of a bomb. As of Sunday, Swansboro, North Carolina, had already received 33.89 inches of rain, smashing the previous record by nearly 1 foot. In North Carolina alone, 1 million people had to be evacuated as 19 states sent aid to that state alone, and highly toxic coal ash was washed into a nearby lake from flooding. However, as bad as all of this is, we must resist the impulse to see it as a wild aberration. Hurricane Florence is a glimpse of storms to come, bigger, stronger, more often. A June report by the Geophysical Fluid Dynamics Laboratory of the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, noted that tropical cyclone events around the world will likely increase along with rainfall rates as the planet warms further. The report reminded us of what science had been showing for years. A warmer atmosphere and warmer ocean waters fuel hurricanes, making them larger and stronger and causing them to occur more frequently. With carbon dioxide, CO2 emissions, and warming continuing unabated, coupled with multiple climate feedback loops intensifying the warming effect, some scientists are now warning that areas typically impacted by hurricanes might ultimately become uninhabitable. Cornell University astrobiologist Jack O'Malley James told Wired magazine recently the negative part is that what we're doing to the planet is making it less suitable for our own survival. Thank you, Jack O'Malley James. Human civilization is dependent upon a millennia of fairly stable and predictable climate conditions. Given that sea level rise is already on track to displace millions of people living in low-lying coastal areas, and the number, size, and frequency of hurricanes is only going to continue to increase, how much longer will countries continue to invest in the billions of dollars required to rebuild devastated cities in the wake of these storms? At what point does this rebuilding simply stop? Then where will all of the victims of these storms go? These are the questions that reasonable policymakers should be asking themselves as we progress further into an era of intensifying weather events. And that's the end of that article. Indeed, when, oh when, are, those with their fingers on the levers of power or the ability to do anything, when are they going to be like, oh, now's a good time? Or, oh, we should do a lot more of this and stop this completely. This is from yesterday by Darjamail from Truth Out. As the biosphere dies, so do we, using the power of nature to heal the planet. One only need look outside the window to understand that human-caused climate disruption is in overdrive. Record warm temperatures, floods, droughts, wildfires, and increasing incidents of extreme weather events have run rampant across the northern hemisphere this summer. These events, at least in part, stem from a global temperature increase of only 1 degree Celsius above pre-industrial baseline temperatures. Harvard and MIT biogeochemist and climate and coral reef expert Dr. Thomas Goreau put this in stark perspective. Today's carbon dioxide levels at 400 parts per million are akin to bringing about a steady state temperature of 7°C higher. 7°C higher, and sea levels 23 meters higher than they are today, Goreau, who is also president of the Global Coral Reef Alliance and coordinator of the Soil Carbon Alliance, told Truth Out. In other words, the last time there was this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it increased the Earth's temperature to a point 7°C higher than it is today, and increased sea levels 23 meters above their current level. Hence, we are now only waiting for the planet to catch up to what we've done to the atmosphere. More than 3 decades ago, Goreau and some of his colleagues were already pointing out that the only way runaway global warming could be avoided was by utilizing and expanding carbon sinks, a natural or artificial area where carbon is stored, as a way of sequestering carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Despite this not happening on the scale necessary to avert widespread impacts of runaway climate change, Goreau, along with many others, is as determined as ever to utilize various methods of eco-restoration to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. These recommendations have gained more attention lately. A recent BBC headline stated, "Large-scale wind and solar power could green the Sahara." The article touts the possibility that if massive numbers of solar panels and wind turbines were installed across the Sahara Desert, they could dramatically improve the amount of rainfall, lower temperatures, and increase vegetation. Goreau is not alone in his idea of large-scale projects that could lead to this sort of mitigation. Adam Sachs is the executive director of Biodiversity for a Livable Climate, Bio for Climate, an organization working to promote eco-restoration approaches. These include the reintroduction of abundant growth to billions of acres of land that has been severely degraded or turned into desert as a result of human mismanagement. Clearly, there are many steps along the way, and a primary one is to shift the climate narrative from one focused almost exclusively on alternative energy and reducing fossil fuel emissions to one that's at least half about restoring global biodiversity and pulling carbon out of the atmosphere into the soils through photosynthesis, Sachs told Truth Out. His approach is to focus on the extraordinary power of nature as a means of healing what ails the planet. Since the first microbes appeared over 3.5 billion years ago and began inventing all the biochemistry of life, living things have crafted planet Earth out of dead rock, water, and gas, Sachs said. We have destroyed much of that life as our world population grew, and while humans are very clever about expanding carrying capacity, we have overdrawn Our resource account and our talents have finally reached their limits. This has happened in many ways, but global warming is the culmination of millennia of hyper-technology. Sachs reminds us that if the biosphere itself is ill, so are humans, as we are simply one of its creatures. As the biosphere dies, so do we, he added. Fortunately, there are thousands, if not millions, of people pulling in that direction on millions of acres. We need to multiply that 1,000-fold to successfully address climate change. We already know how to do this. Sachs feels that every country on Earth has grossly underestimated the severity, extent, and rapidity of the impacts of climate destruction. Thank you for speaking the truth, and has been dismayed by how, as he sees, the full implications are only appreciated when the damage has been done and all that's left is to watch as destruction and death have their way. This is why he founded Biosphere, as an attempt to avert these outcomes for millions of species, including humans. For Garreau, who collaborates with Biosphere, this work is nothing new. He has been writing scientific papers on recycling carbon dioxide through the tropical biota to prevent runaway global warming for nearly 35 years. He made the first measurements of greenhouse gas emissions from deforested Amazonian soils and virgin jungles and wrote the very first short paper on the subject. Garreau's 1987 paper even argued for a carbon tax, although at the time he called it an energy growth tax, which would transfer income from fuel burners to environmentally sound tropical development. Through books, talks, and papers, Garreau has long been suggesting methods to the general public as well as interested governments for implementing the concept of regenerating carbon in soils and biomass while simultaneously pulling it out of the atmosphere. The idea is scientifically sound and has occurred independently to many people. As people try to think about solving climate change seriously, Garreau said, though he noted that not many people seem to be familiar with the history of the concept of eco-restoration. Last year, Garreau presented a paper at the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization Global Symposium on soil organic carbon that investigated how long it would take to stabilize atmospheric carbon dioxide at safe pre-industrial levels by way of drawing carbon into soils. I'm interested to hear this. Stabilization could be achieved in decades only if we use the best existing carbon farming practices, but never if we keep on doing what we are doing now, Garreau said. Thousands of farmers are out there doing the right thing and regenerating their soils, but the millions out there who are just running their soils down and amplifying the problem need to improve their act quickly for there to be any solution at all. And we also need to stop producing more greenhouse gases. Sachs is also realistic about what it would take. NASA climate scientist James Hansen sounded the alarm about anthropogenic climate disruption to Congress in 1988. And despite the ongoing efforts of tireless advocates, atmospheric greenhouse gas burdens have worsened almost every year, due in large part to burning fossil fuels. It should have been clear from the beginning, even with effective sources of alternative energy, a global infrastructure would take a long time to reconstruct, Sachs said. But how feasible are projects like greening the Sahara? This one in particular would require only 3.5 million square miles of solar panels. Nearly, I think I read only, nearly 3.5 million square miles of solar panels and wind turbines to produce the necessary change. That's a lot of miles. What government on the planet is currently willing to invest in this scale of a project? Even if we acknowledge that these kinds of projects may well be the last hope for mitigating some of the most dramatically increasing impacts of runaway ACD, well, we better do it quick while we still have some money. Because, once the economy collapses, ain't nobody got money for that. Sachs readily admits that on our current path, there is no emission scenario that can or will scale this large enough to truly mitigate the worsening impacts from human-caused climate disruption. Right. Even if we go to zero emissions tomorrow, the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and the committed effects are consigning us to a future that will make life for humans extremely difficult or impossible, he said. John Liu is the ecosystems ambassador for the Common Land Foundation, a group working toward the realization of large-scale landscape restoration with local farmers and land users. He is also a groundbreaking filmmaker who focuses on documenting ecological restoration around the planet. Liu told Truth Out he is excited and hopeful about the large amount of energy and interest in large-scale ecosystem restoration that he says is exploding all over the world. In addition to the work of the Common Land Foundation, Liu, who is also a visiting research fellow at the Netherlands Institute of Ecology of the Royal Academy of Arts and Sciences, points to Ecosystem Restoration Camps Foundation, a group working to restore ecosystem functionality, which he sees as proof that people anywhere can self-organize and self-govern in a way that is restorative of the earth. While Liu acknowledges that our current situation is fraught with danger, quote unquote, he added that he believes we are entering a new era of human civilization in which we are required to collectively understand that we all have a responsibility to act to restore the systems that naturally regulate the Earth's life support systems. Indeed, and let's hope that advances a lot faster. Liu said his greatest hope is in the Earth's resilience and pointed out that it is not the planet that is the most at risk, but human civilization. Okay, while most people point towards the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as the primary issue that needs addressing, Liu sees this carbon disequilibrium in the atmosphere as an indicator. Yeah. What I've learned is that we cannot simply consider carbon in the atmosphere and believe that sucking it down will solve our problems, he said. And even in terms of human impact on the greenhouse effect, carbon dioxide is not the greatest anthropogenic cause. Most people are unaware that moisture-laden air in the upper atmosphere caused by temperature increases from devegetation is a greater anthropogenic contributor to the greenhouse effect than carbon dioxide. Like Liu, Sachs and Garreau both believe it is possible to mitigate the worsening impacts. Nature can do the recovery if we help by putting the necessary pieces into place. Sachs said, just as absent beavers or wolves in a formerly intact habitat can completely transform the ecosystem within a few years, humans are also a keystone species and can help nature recover orders of magnitude faster than nature would recover on its own. I actually happen to agree with that. There are so many examples of bodies and systems, recovering quickly if they are allowed to. And, why not? Why don't we allow them to? And why don't we help that along? I'm fully behind that. Sachs's organizational compendium shows, as he put it, how we already know how to do this in virtually all habitats between the poles. He describes the methods as inexpensive and low-tech and believes they increase productivity significantly, improve local economies and self-sufficiency, restore local water cycles, mitigate droughts and floods, and reduce resource conflicts. The challenge is that we would have to move this effort to a global war footing immediately, he said. The windows of opportunity to act on global warming have been opening and closing and opening again and closing again over the past 30 years, and those squandered opportunities are just about dried up. There is no way to seriously mitigate the impacts of runaway climate disruption without drawing vast amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And Sachs and Garreau are convinced that the fastest way to sequester carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is via biological sink. We've destroyed half the biomass in the world and turned it into carbon dioxide, and we've lost about half the carbon in the soil by burning it off, Garreau said. But if we are doing what the best people are doing here, we could solve the problem in a matter of decades or matter. I don't know. Given that there is 5 times the amount of carbon in soils as there is in the atmosphere, Garreau believes it is possible to sequester an immense amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide back into the earth via natural processes like increasing nutrients in soils, as well as restoring wetlands and mangroves on a mass scale. From my point of view, we've got to be restoring carbon in all habitats and ecosystems, he said. Both Sachs and Garreau feel a lot of the responsibility lies with farmers and those who manage pastures, who could be regenerating the areas where they work, as opposed to industrial agriculture, which, as Garreau puts it, runs land dry of carbon. Of course, this would entail governments supporting farmers financially and otherwise and working towards this way of operating. When you look at how effective The good farmers are at sequestering carbon. It is well within our reach to sequester enough carbon dioxide, and if there were carbon credits so they were rewarded, it would happen, he said. What to do? It's not only farmers who are capable of acting on eco-restoration. What steps can each of us take? The most important is to change the mindset from ongoing growth to reducing resource exploitation and steady state regenerative land management and economics. Garreau said, for starters, he suggests that people with homes can transform their lawns into native plant and food forests, and everyone should begin to work within their communities toward urban and suburban farming. Yes, yes, yes. Sachs also promotes the movement to depave roads and parking lots, for example. Yes, yes, yes. Depavement removes unnecessary impermeable surfaces and replaces them with green growing things wherever possible. Additionally, Sachs points to forest regeneration efforts and suggests that those who are interested in exploring more options should visit the Regeneration International website. Liu admits that the question of what to do is challenging even to discuss, and that it isn't very helpful to suggest small measures that are unlikely to really change the situation. Still, on a personal level, he tries to slow down and consider his motivations and intentions. He says that the dominant culture's media and education system have instilled ambitions for him and most of us to rush around, to buy and sell things, to desire the conveniences that I thought I needed. That is truth, truth, and more truth. To meet the expectations of society that we have been conditioned into me through socialization. Oh, I like that. Liu believes each of us needs to be mindful and question the forces that drive our pursuits. Is our worldview something that is truth, or does it emerge from the past through norms created by those who practice genocide, slavery, greed, power, brutality, he asks. Liu points out that shifting consciousness must occur alongside efforts toward biospheric restoration. There is an enormous disparity between the wealthy and the poor. There is also a growing sense of hopelessness that manifests in depression, suicide, nihilistic acts like mass shootings, and great unhappiness, he said. The types of social dysfunction that we are witnessing are similar to witnessing ecosystem dysfunction in various biomes. A logical conclusion could be that our human social ecosystem is degraded. Garreau, meanwhile, is working on coral reef restoration because we've already lost most of them to global warming. He has been warning of coral bleaching from overly warm ocean water since the 1980s and believes the tipping point for coral bleaching already occurred during that decade. He reminds us that our current global climate crisis is already much more dire than most people realize. His projects entail the use of very low electric currents to stimulate coral growth by way of steel grids erected underwater, onto which then limestone rock grows, hence the building of reefs. He has found that in this way, coral can be kept alive at warmer temperatures as well, but added this is only a temporary measure to buy us some time until we can get more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, or how about out of the oceans. Garreau is currently aiming to revive 400 reefs around the world and admits that this is but a fraction of what needs to happen. Death is a natural part of life. Garreau reminds us that all these projects are taking place against the backdrop of runaway ACD. The reality, he says, is even more devastating than most mainstream predictions show. This is far worse than the IPCC's worst-case scenarios, he said. Garreau noted that even the IPCC's worst-case scenarios are so minimal because it takes the oceans 1,500 years to mix and turn themselves over. This is relevant, he said, because oceans are storing 95% of the heat we've generated. Hence, until the cold water of the depths mixes with the warmer surface water, we're still not feeling the full impact of the heat we placed in the oceans. This means that we will not feel the full impacts for another 1,500 years yet. As Garreau pointed out, the IPCC ignores this because they are only looking 100 years ahead, which is 1/15 of the time it takes for the oceans to mix. They are simply looking at the wrong time horizon. As we reflect on how conditions have gotten to this point, Liu also reminds us how death is a natural part of life, given that the dominant culture ignores this reality with dangerous consequences. In his view, the denial of death has inflated our opinion of ourselves and limited our understanding and happiness. It can be hard to accept, but death is inevitable and being aware of it is very useful. This Liu guy is very interesting. From his perspective, it is important to remember this is not just as humans, but to do so for all of life. This is all the more reason to focus on eco-restoration and, relatedly, Liu says, on the importance of the natural world more broadly. We need to look carefully and compare our creations to the eternally evolving life systems on the earth and realize that everything we have ever made and everything that we will ever make combined is worth less than the fragile atmosphere that was respirated by living things over a prodigious time, he said. In order to undertake eco-restoration on the scale that would be necessary to mitigate the impacts of ACD, those in power in countries around the world would have to immediately prioritize that fragile atmosphere above all else. I rather like that article. I hope you all did too. That's all I have for today. We're going to leave it at a Darja Mail only video. Dar, as usual, doing great work and is quite prolific these days. I see more and more of his articles almost at least once a week popping up in Truth Out. And as you all know, he's a regular, a staple in this channel's readings. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your ears, your eyes, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Until next time, peace.